The first time they accused me, I tried to understand the logic in their lies. In the frozen northern realm, people didn't need truth when fear could do the work for them. A rumor moved faster than snow that I'd stolen something sacred from the old sanctuary, something that should never be touched by hands like mine. I was working, only trying to survive another winter without becoming a burden to anyone. They called me cursed. That word was a blade they passed around like it was proof. My clan's hearth turned into a tribunal. Faces I'd shared broth with suddenly looked at me like I was rot creeping along the floorboards when the guard dragged me out past the wall. The wind didn't just bite, it seemed to listen. It followed me as if it wanted to see if I'd break. I didn't. I still didn't. The mark beneath my collarbone burned that night, sharp as a brand under skin. It always did when the cold sank too deep into my bones, but no one cared enough to learn what it meant. They only cared what it could be made to mean. The sanctuary they spoke of didn't exist for them anymore. The relic they wanted me to answer for, some heirloom of the old kings, had been hidden for a generation, lost under snow and secrecy. Their stories were inconsistent, which meant they weren't trying to solve anything. They were trying to make me fit the shape of their fear, Sabluin. My own blood on paper and betrayal made flesh in practice, smiled at the edges of the crowd as though she'd been polishing her win. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to, she just made sure. Everyone looked at me, at the moments that mattered, as if my life was a play, and she'd been assigned the scene where the villain triumphs. When they bound my wrists, I kept my hands loose. I refused to be dramatic. I refused to give them what they wanted. A frantic creature begging for mercy, I was exiled with a warning that sounded like a prophecy. The council said, my punishment wasn't just exile. It was that I should learn what it meant to carry power without permission. They said it like I'd chosen it. I walked north into the white that erased paths. At first, I told myself I could survive on instinct and stubbornness. Then the mark under my collarbone flared, and the air around me changed. It was subtle at first, like a room where someone just opened a hidden door. My breath fogged in tight spirals that lingered longer than they should. The snow on my boots didn't melt. It etched itself into patterns I hadn't drawn. I'd always thought the mark was a curse. Curses make you feel powerless. But when it flared, I didn't feel weak. I felt alert, as though something in me was waking, not angry, not hungry, just awake. The danger came in the form of footsteps without bodies. I found the first trail of them near an abandoned watchtower. There were tracks in the frost, too many for animals, too neat for wind to fake. The mark burned hotter, and every time I tried to turn away, the world tilted toward those tracks as though it knew where I belonged. Then I saw the truth. Not footsteps, but signs. The snow had been disturbed in a way that looked like a spiral trying to break free, like the cold itself was trying to teach me a language. I should have run toward warmth. Instead, I followed the pull, because what else did I have? My clan hated me. My name was poison. The only thing I owned was my will. At the base of the watchtower, I found a blackened metal door, half buried. Runes were etched across it, faint at first, then clearer as I stepped close. My fingers hovered over the carvings, and, without permission, the mark under my collarbone lit. It didn't burn me, it aligned with the door like two halves of the same instrument. The door opened with a groan that sounded older than human voices. Inside, the air smelled like iron and old lightning. I didn't see treasure, I saw cages, I saw warnings etched into stone. And I saw a small hoard of objects wrapped in cloth, each tied with a strip of blackened thread. Someone had prepared a trap. The moment I reached for the cloth, the wind slammed against the tower. Shadows moved beyond the entrance as if the dark had weight. I backed away, heart steady because fear was wasted energy. I watched the opening until the first figure emerged. It wasn't one of my clan's guards. It wasn't anyone I recognized. It was a messenger for the Alpha King. I learned that word by hearing it in whispers over the years. Caelthran, King of Isolation, the beast that kept enemies at a distance even before anyone admitted what lived in his bones. The messengers didn't come often. When they did, it meant something in the realm had turned dangerous enough that politics couldn't handle it. The messenger's face was covered, but their posture was unmistakable. Someone trained to move like a blade. "Woman," the messenger said, and the voice wasn't cruel. It was efficient. I should have bargained. I should have demanded to know why I was being found in a snow grave, but I'd been exiled. I'd already lost the right to choose how I was handled. So, I asked the only thing that mattered. "What do you want?" The messenger didn't answer directly. They pointed at my collarbone, at the frost spiral that had stayed awake under my skin. "Carry what they can't. They will use it." The words made my stomach knot. They didn't say you. They said, "what they can't," as if I was only a container. The messenger gestured toward the open tower. "Come! The king requires you." I laughed once, quiet and bitter. Require? Like I was livestock. Like I hadn't spent nights freezing, with no one asking permission. "I'm not yours," I said. The messenger's gaze sharpened. "No, but you are in our way, and you are in theirs." That was the first time someone admitted the truth without mocking me. Not mine, not theirs, in the middle of something bigger. I followed, because the alternative was walking deeper into a winter that had started to feel alive. Days later, the castle rose from the snow like a blade pulled from a sheath. Isolation didn't mean empty, it meant controlled. Every torch burned with a disciplined steadiness. Every guard stood like they belonged to the stone. When they brought me to the gates, no one asked my story. They watched my hands. They watched the mark, tack. They watched the breath that fogged in spirals and then seemed to be inhaled back into my chest. I expected hatred. I got silence. The Alpha King arrived at the threshold without ceremony. His presence didn't storm. It settled. Caelthran moved, like someone who'd learned what it meant to be obeyed and what it cost him when he hated the feeling. His eyes met mine, and the air between us tightened, as if a leash snapped taut. Behind him, the pack waited, not as bodies, but as instincts. I could feel them like pressure under my skin. Wolves didn't just observe. They measured. They expected hunger. They expected threat. The beast in Caelthran, whatever name it had in its own language, seemed to notice me first, not with tenderness, with recognition. That should have terrified me. It did, but it also made something else stir. The sense that my exile wasn't the end of the story. It was the opening chapter. Caelthran didn't speak immediately. The guards shifted to make room, but their movement wasn't for my comfort. It was for his. Then he stepped closer. My mark flared as if it had been waiting. His gaze dropped to my collarbone, and for the first time I saw the smallest flicker of restraint at the edges of his expression. Like the king had to fight himself to remain an unblinking silhouette. He lifted a hand. The air around his fingers moved, stirring frost from the ground. The wolves behind him lowered their heads in a synchronized pause. I pulled back before his touch reached my skin. I didn't want to be handled. Caelthran's presence stiffened. The beast pressed forward through him like a tide hitting the shore, and then, without striking, without grabbing, he stopped. He let the space between us remain. "Why did they send you?" he asked finally. I met his eyes. They sent me because they needed a scapegoat. He didn't ask if I was innocent. He asked what I carried. The question wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. "I don't know," I admitted, because lying felt pointless when my mark had already betrayed me. Caelthron's jaw flexed once, a small movement that made the guards exhale like they'd been holding their breath. He turned his head slightly, and a command passed through him to the pack. The wolves didn't charge. They didn't surround me like a hunt. They formed a loose perimeter close enough to deny escape, far enough to avoid panic. Caelthron's voice lowered. You will stay, not because I trust you, because the cold is calling you. My throat tightened. The cold is calling everyone. No. He looked at my collarbone again, and the beast in him shifted. Restless. Only those who carry what was buried. He ordered them to take me to the keep's inner chambers. Not the dungeon, not a cell, a room that smelled faintly of pine resin and clean linen. They didn't give me chains. That should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like something worse, a choice to keep me alive, for reasons I didn't yet understand. That night, I sat by the narrow window, watching snow fall through moonlight. My mark throbbed when the wind pressed against the glass. It felt like a heartbeat that belonged to a creature beneath my skin. I whispered to it, the way you speak to something you can't fight. If you're a curse, you're cruel. The spirals of breath that rose from me weren't random. They formed faint patterns, then faded. When I tried to focus harder, they sharpened. The room's shadows moved as if they had depth that didn't exist a moment ago, somewhere in the keep. I heard wolves shifting in their sleep. Then I heard footsteps. I opened the door to find Caelthron standing in the corridor, half-turned as if he'd been passing by and decided to stop at the exact moment he should. His face was unreadable, but the beast under his skin was awake. I felt it the way you feel, a storm before thunder. You've been breathing wrong, he said. I stared at him. Breathing wrong. His gaze dropped to my collarbone again. The mark wakes when the air is calm. You're making it restless. My anger rose on instinct. So you know? You knew? And still let them take me. The air tightened. The pack behind him shifted like a warning. Caelthron didn't flinch from my anger. He just held his ground. I didn't take you, he said. I stopped them from turning you into a weapon. My chest hurt, with how much I wanted to believe him, and how much I didn't. I don't need your protection, I said. His eyes didn't soften, they sharpened. Protection is not a gift, it's an agreement. You carry something that draws enemies. If you refuse protection, you declare you want to die. I wanted to argue, but what he said felt too close to truth. Exile had already been a slow kind of death. I swallowed. What is it then? Caelthron looked away, just briefly. That tiny fracture in his composure was more honest than any explanation. A seal, he said, a piece of an old bargain. The cold is part of it. The war is part of it. And someone wants the bargain completed. The name of the someone didn't need to be spoken. Betrayal always leaves breadcrumbs. The next day, they put me to work, not as a servant, not as a prisoner, as someone expected to be useful. I cleaned, I carried water, I stitched torn linens and scraped frost from door frames with a careful blade. It was ordinary, but with my mark awake, the ordinary became charged. Every time my hands touched a cold surface, the frost lines curled into faint spirals and then retracted. My breath fogged in patterns again, but this time they aligned with the rhythms of the castle itself. As if the keep had a pulse, and I was learning its language, Caelthron watched from a distance at first, not glaring, not lurking like a predator, like a commander studying whether a blade can be trusted. When I set a basin down, I did it exactly centered. When I hung towels, I ensured their edges faced inward. Little choices, no fighting, no confrontation. The pack reacted anyway. One of the northern wolves, dark-furred with a white scar along its snout, approached the doorway one slow step at a time. It didn't bare teeth. It sniffed the air near my hands, then watched my face as if trying to understand a language without words. I didn't run, I exhaled slowly, so my breath wouldn't spike the mark. The wolf dipped its head. That small gesture felt like permission. A guard scoffed behind me. Animals have bad judgment. I glanced back without letting my hands tremble. Then the pack can learn. The guard's eyes narrowed. You think you can command beasts? No, I tied off a thread with calm precision. I just do what needs doing. If their instincts disagree, they can explain it. Caelthran entered the room at that moment. He didn't interrupt the guard. He didn't scold. He just stood with the stillness of winter and let the tension hang like a curtain. The guard bowed quickly. Caelthran looked at me, then at the wolf, then down at my hands. Your breathing steadied it, he said. I didn't breathe for it, I answered. He stepped closer by an inch, just enough that the beast inside him stirred, and the wolf's ears lifted. I noticed, Caelthran said. The word was so controlled, it could have been a command. But the pack's reaction, how they pressed closer without being ordered, told me the truth beneath his restraint. Caelthran wasn't just watching to guard himself. He was watching to see whether I could survive in the world he'd built. As days passed, I learned what my exile had taken from me, the ability to be taken seriously without being punished for it here. I was still treated like a variable. But I had agency in the only way a woman with a burned reputation can, by refusing to collapse, by choosing my actions, not my label. I kept the castle clean, even when resentment tried to drag me down. I healed small injuries that belonged to people who thought healing was beneath my status. I wrapped cracked knuckles. I soothed chapped lips. I pressed a cloth to bruises from training accidents, and I did it without asking permission. The mark warmed under my collarbone when I worked like that, when I did not fight, did not beg, did not bargain, when I simply helped. The strange part was that the mark didn't only respond to my touch, it responded to my choices. When I tried to withdraw, it throbbed violently. When I tried to harden into bitterness, the cold around my skin sharpened like a blade. When I allowed myself to be gentle, careful, not naive, the warmth threaded through me like a slow thaw. That was when I understood something frightening. The power wasn't only in the mark, it was in me, and someone else had planned to use me to finish a bargain I didn't know existed. The shocking twist came through betrayal that didn't arrive with a scream. It arrived with a visitor. Sablewind walked through the keep as if she'd owned the path in every snowfall. She wore court elegance, like armor. Her eyes flicked to Caelthran, then away, as though showing him respect was a tactic. When she saw me, her smile sharpened. She didn't accuse me. She didn't need to. She spoke like she was offering me kindness. You're still here, she said softly. I kept my hands steady, folding linens. Ordinary action, extraordinary consequence. You're not welcome, I replied. Sablewind's brows rose. And yet the king keeps you. The words were poison, threaded with curiosity. Caelthran appeared behind her without warning. The air thickened, walls shifted so their bodies formed a warning line. Sablewind's voice stayed calm. My apologies. I didn't come for trouble. I came for the truth. Caelthran's gaze didn't leave me, but the beast in him rippled forward as if his attention wanted to become an attack. Sablewind reached into her cloak and drew out a cloth-wrapped object. My mark flared like a candle in wind. The cold in the room seemed to freeze harder. Sablewind's eyes gleamed. You see? It reacts. You're not just carrying the seal. You're carrying the king's undoing. Caelthran's voice came out low. Put it away. Sablewind's smile flickered. Is that what you'll do? Protect her? Or finish what the old bargain started? The wolves behind Caelthran growled, not loud, but thick with threat. Sablewind lifted the object slightly, just enough to ignite more of the cold around me. You know what it is. she said to Caelthrin. You've known all along. But you kept her anyway. Then she looked back at me. Because you think she can be controlled, I swallowed. My throat felt tight as rope. I didn't know what the bargain meant. I only knew the moment Sabluin's object came into the room. The mark wanted to wake fully, as if it had been starved. Caelthrin's beast wasn't reacting like a man angry. It was reacting like a guardian cornered by a trap. When Caelthrin took one step forward, the wolves surged, then stopped at his command. His control terrified me more than any rage. He reached for the cloth-wrapped object with careful precision. Instead of grabbing, he placed 2 fingers near it, and his power pressed outward like a shield made of ice. The object went still. Sablewind's face tightened. She hadn't expected him to control the mark through distance. Caelthrin's eyes narrowed. You wanted me to confirm it, he said. Sablewind's voice turned sly. I wanted you to admit it. He said nothing. But the pack's stance shifted, tightening around her presence like a living cage. I watched Sablewind's expression closely. She wasn't afraid of Caelthrin. She was afraid of the mark being loyal to the wrong owner. I realized then what her role truly was. Not just betrayal, not just framing. She was the one who'd set me up to awaken the seal at the exact time the kingdom needed a weapon. Caelthrin could sense it too, because the moment Sablewind's lie stopped being subtle, his walls began to move. Not down, not open, but shifting. As days unfolded after Sablewind's visit, the keep started to change. The air grew colder in corners that weren't exposed to the wind. The torches burned blue instead of gold. The wolves became restless, their howls distant even within stone halls. Caelthrin stopped sleeping. I noticed because the hallway would be empty for hours. Then he'd appear at dawn with frost in his hair and no trace of fatigue. I didn't ask if he was okay. I cleaned his messes instead. I fed the wolves without being asked. I watched the pack line up near my doorway each night, as if the scent of my ordinary care reminded them of something they couldn't name. Then it happened. My mark awakened fully. It didn't burst. It didn't explode. It unfolded like a lock turning. The spiral beneath my skin became a pattern I could feel in my bones. I stumbled to the floor, breath catching. The mark burned. But the burn wasn't pain. It was a call. In my mind, images flashed: a throne built from frozen stone, a pact signed with blood and winter, a betrayal that ended with a woman being cast out as the proof needed to start a war. I saw Sablewind as a child in one memory, hands stained with ink from old stories. I saw her older, planning. I saw her placing objects in the tower to catch my curiosity. I saw the final twist. Sablewind wasn't just using me. She'd been trying to replace me. Someone with similar blood, someone with similar mark. But Sablewind's mark had been broken, and mine had survived. The seal recognized me, and my seal wanted Caelthrin. Not because it was loyal to him as a man, because he was the missing half of the bargain's final command. I pushed myself upright, trembling. My breath spiraled violently now, and the room's frost began to creep toward the walls, like tendrils searching for an exit. I heard pounding feet guards sprinting, alarmed, but the wolves didn't run. They pressed closer. One of them, the scarred wolf, nudged my hand as though I was hurt, and it knew where I needed pressure. I didn't have to be knocked down for it to show care. Caelthrin arrived instantly. When he saw the frost crawling along the floor, he didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He approached with the careful slowness of someone entering a sanctuary. "Breathe," he ordered. I wanted to refuse, because orders were a trigger now. But my body needed the rhythm. My mark wanted a pattern only someone like him could read. So I breathed, and the frost responded. The spiral patterns aligned with the carvings on the castle's walls. as if the keep had been waiting for this alignment for years. Caelthrin's beast surged forward in a protective instinct so raw the air around him shivered. His gaze flicked to the guards. Leave. They hesitated, caught between duty and fear. Caelthrin's pack growled, and their hesitation became retreat. He was left alone with me, and the marks awakening. The king stared at me like I was a storm he'd been trying to hold behind a door. "You're not the weapon," he said, voice rougher now. The words struck me because he didn't say "you're safe." He said, "You're not the thing they're making you into." I swallowed. "Then, what am I?" Caelthrin's jaw tightened. The seal was meant to bind the coal to the throne, but the throne was broken by betrayal. I stared, breath thin, and the betrayal blamed me. "Yes!" He looked away as if admitting it cost him something. They needed a sacrifice to make the pact feel justified. My eyes burned. Not with tears yet, just with the intensity of finally seeing the shape of my suffering. Caelthrin stepped closer, and the frost around me loosened, as though his presence was a key, turning the next lock. "The final command requires two things," he said. "The seal's loyalty and the king's restraint." I didn't understand, but my mark did. It pulsed under my collarbone, as if anticipating the next movement. Caelthrin's hand hovered near my shoulder. He didn't touch. He waited, like he was asking my consent without words. That wait broke something in me. Not because I needed him, because he didn't take. I surprised myself by leaning forward and placing my hand over his wrist, his breath hitched, his beast reacting through his posture, not his voice. I felt the contrast between his coldness and the heat under my mark. A pact began to form in the space between us. Not romance yet, not comfort, not anything sweet. A vow. When my mark pulsed again, the castle shuddered, the torches flared. And somewhere deeper within the keep, a hidden chamber opened with a thunderous crack. Sound travelled through stone like a heartbeat. Caelthrin's eyes went distant for a moment. He looked like a man listening to echoes of a war. He hadn't fought yet, but already carried. Then he snapped back to the present and turned toward the sound. "Come," he said. I didn't follow automatically. I gathered myself, hands steady. Agency isn't a gift, it's a decision. I rose and walked beside him, leaving frost spirals behind my steps like trail marks. In the hidden chamber, we found the old relic, a broken crown set with frozen crystal shards, and a chain made of something that wasn't metal, something like condensed winter light. Sablewind's voice echoed from a concealed doorway. "So it's real." I froze. Caelthrin's pack growled low, forming a living shield around me. Sablewind emerged with the calm of someone stepping onto a stage she'd built. She looked at me with contempt, but not fear. "Do you feel it?" she asked. "The power they couldn't control." Caelthrin spoke without turning. "You can't finish what you started." Sablewind smiled. "I already did." The shocking twist wasn't that she wanted the throne. It was that she wanted to erase Caelthrin's authority by making the seal turn against him. She raised her hands, and frost swirled from her palms like ink poured in reverse. My mark reacted violently. It tried to pull away from Caelthrin's control. It tried to become a different lock. My breath turned jagged. Pain wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the confusion in my own power. Like a part of me recognized Sablewind's intention as a familiar language. I wanted to scream. Instead, I grabbed the edge of the relic's crown and focused on something I could do. I repaired. Not with force, with attention. I pressed my fingers into the frozen crystal and guided the shards into alignment, the way I would guide thread through cloth. It hurt. The mark flared with each correction. But the more I focused on healing the relic, the less my power tried to obey Sablewind. Sablewind hissed, eyes widening. "Stop doing that!" I looked at her, breathing hard. "You can't use me if I refuse to become your tool." Caelthran stepped closer, finally touching the relic, his hand over mine, not claiming. His presence steadied the mark. The pack's howls changed pitch, harmonizing with the seal's awakening, as if wolves were meant to be instruments of loyalty. Sablewind's magic faltered for the first time. She looked genuinely alarmed. Caelthran's beast finally broke through the restraint that held it back for so long, not as violence toward me, as domination over the betrayal. He didn't strike Sablewind, he bound the cold itself. The chamber's frost snapped into a disciplined lattice around her hands, trapping her power in a pattern the seal could interpret. Sablewind screamed once, short, sharp, then went silent as the cold swallowed her spell. When it was over, the chamber quieted. My mark pulsed, slower now. The seal's logic settled into place. I sank to my knees, exhausted. Caelthran knelt beside me, but he didn't crowd. He placed a fur-lined cloak over my shoulders, careful not to smother the warmth blooming beneath my skin. His pack pressed closer, not as threat, but as testimony. I looked up at him, and something in me softened, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it through restraint. I still didn't know the full meaning of the bond between king and seal. But I knew this. The world that tried to exile me had been wrong. I wasn't cursed into helplessness. I was cursed into responsibility. And I had chosen how to carry it. Caelthran's eyes met mine, and the beast beneath his control leaned forward without permission, then stopped, waiting for me to decide what happened next. I decided. I reached for his hand and held it over my collarbone, letting the seal feel contact with his restraint. In that moment, the frost patterns beneath my skin turned into a calm spiral, no longer a flare, no longer a trap, a home. When the Royal Council demanded an audience afterward, Caelthran didn't bring me as a spectacle. He brought me as a witness. He stood at the throne, the relic's crown now repaired and steady, and my mark quieted as if it recognized the final form. The council expected confession, expected me to beg. Instead, I spoke with my own voice. I explained what the tower held. I explained how the mark had awakened. I explained how Sablewind had crafted the trap to frame me. I didn't beg for mercy. I described the truth, like a woman laying down evidence. Caelthran's pack watched the council with predatory patience, and when they tried to deny me, the wolves shifted, reminding everyone that power didn't always come from words. Caelthran finally acknowledged the part he'd been refusing to say. Not love, not yet, choice. He stepped down from the throne and stood before me as if offering a vow you can't escape. "You will not be exiled again," he promised. His beast pressed against the words like a seal sealing parchment. I swallowed, feeling the last ice in my chest crack. "I don't belong to you," I said. His eyes sharpened, then softened in increments I could measure, "then belong to yourself and to what you repair." The pack exhaled in a synchronized breath that sounded like relief. That night, Caelthran didn't call for me. He didn't demand closeness. The castle's corridors were quiet when I walked through them, but one of the wolves followed me. Without me asking, another followed. They walked me to the small chamber that held the seal's history. There, Caelthran waited. He looked more tired than he had all week, not because he'd surrendered, but because he'd allowed himself to be present. I sat by the carved stone and touched the repaired crown gently. Caelthran sat opposite, leaving distance. But the distance wasn't empty. It was bridged by shared silence. Then he spoke, voice low enough that it didn't sound like command. It sounded like truth dragged from a deep place. "The cold always finds its way back," he said. "But with you, the cold doesn't win." My breath caught. I hated how much hope still hurt. I looked up at him. "You've kept me alive. You've kept me from their plans." Caelthran nodded once. Restrained. And, I asked, because I needed to know whether this was protection or possession. His gaze held mine. The beast's presence pulsed like a steady heartbeat at my side. He didn't say an emotion. He said, an action. I will stand where you need me, not in front of you. My throat tightened, and I let myself lean forward until my shoulder touched his. Not a collapse. A choice. Caelthrin didn't move away. The pack outside the door didn't growl. They settled, as if the realm had finally become bearable. In the following weeks, the seal's power began to translate itself through my ordinary acts. When I cleaned, the frost around the castle became orderly again. When I healed, the cold in the guards' lungs eased after training. When I hummed under my breath while I worked, the wolves calmed, their movements slow and purposeful. It wasn't magic fireworks, it was transformation, and as I grew stronger, so did the king's walls, until the walls stopped being barriers and became a structure built for both of us. The final twist in our story didn't come from enemies. It came from what the seal revealed about destiny. Caelthrin brought me to the edge of the frozen northern realm, to a cliff where the snow fell into black water. There, the wind carried a whisper like old parchment. The seal recognized the sound, and my mark warmed. A vision rose, a future where the throne ruled, not by fear, but by balance, where exile became mercy, where betrayal was punished, where the cold served protection instead of conquest. But I realized then that the mark wasn't only a weapon, it was an anchor. It had been waiting for the king who could restrain his beast, and it had been waiting for me to choose the kind of woman I would be. Caelthrin stood behind me, close enough that I felt warmth through fur and air. His hands hovered near my shoulders, like he was still learning the new agreement. Consent, patience, shared control. I turned slightly and looked up at him. His eyes held the same storm as before, but now it wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed outward, at the world that tried to break us. When I finally rested my forehead against his chest, his beast exhaled. The pack quieted as though the castle itself had accepted the change. I didn't feel rescued. I felt chosen. Chosen by a king, powerful enough to keep his beast on a leash, and by a seal that responded only to the version of me that stopped being only a victim. We walked back through the snow together. Not as a woman who'd been cast out, and not as a beastly king who'd finally gotten what he wanted, as two halves of a bargain, slowly melting, building a future from trust, care, and the truth that betrayal could never fully rewrite. At the threshold of the throne room, Caelthrin offered his hand. This time, the gesture was unguarded, not desperate, not demanding, just ready. I took it. And the wolves, sensing the pact complete, followed us like dawn follows night, silent, inevitable, and finally kind.